Freedom of speech is one of the fundamental rights enshrined in the constitutions of all the democratic countries of the world. It is considered the most important article and right in the modern state, as it lies down the foundation of free, vibrant, and democratic society. That day, when they reached the hotel, Rani Krishna was at a loss as to the treatment afforded the reigning Miss India upon her arrival in London. She simply could not understand the philosophy behind allowing British Muslims to terrorize people they disagree with. After all, her experience with Muslims had taught her that Muslims are simply unable to agree to disagree. Every real or imaginary slight would cause the Muslims to seethe and plan retribution. Above all, she wanted to know why they were allowed to abuse the laws of the country they were living in. The laws protecting free speech were supposed to enhance and preserve the safety of people and not allow them to be terrorized. The London police should not allow one segment of the population to malign their laws in the name of freedom of speech so that they can terrorize law-abiding citizens for expressing their opinions. Even in Muslim countries, Muslims are denied the right to assemble and air their grievances like this unless specifically sanctioned by the authorities. As the bus reached their hotel, Rani was flabbergasted to know that there would be no special police protection for Miss India. Miss India, she was advised, would be treated like any other contestant. There would be no special police task stationed at the hotel, and they had received no instructions to mobilize any anti-terrorism squads. The hotel, on the other hand, had its own security guards, and that was the only protection Miss India could expect. Rani reminded the contest officials that their arrival was a sling fest of rotten eggs and spoiled produce by angry bearded men and veiled women. She demanded to know if the pageant organizers or the hotel had any security measures and contingency procedures in place to deal with bomb threats, or potential gunmen and hazardous materials like sulfuric acid. Her argument was simply that all guests are at risk from religious fanatics. The representatives stressed it was beyond their capacity to deal with these sort of issues. She contacted the London Police Force and Scotland Yard to ask for a special security team to protect Miss India. Once again, the authorities denied their request, explaining that they had not received any requests from either the Government of India or the Indian Embassy asking them to dispatch a security detail. The London police did not seem obliged to ascribe extra forces for what was essentially an international and completely an Indian problem. Denied once again, she contacted the Indian Embassy in London with the same request. Unfortunately, the Indian ambassador happened to be a Muslim and he flatly rejected the request on the grounds that he received no such instructions from the government of Maharashtra in Mumbai or the central government in New Delhi. When neither the London police nor the Indian Embassy was ready to provide protection, Rani opted to cancel the mission and withdraw Miss India. She mused, with some satisfaction, that her Mumbai house had a sizable police detail 24 hours a day. A special task force is allocated to every Miss India residence. One of the contestants broke the awkward silence and suggested that Rani not deprive her daughter from what would surely be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, only given to a very select few. That contestant happened to be Miss Israel and a Jewess. She reasoned that London was home to world-class security companies like G4S which could provide Miss India better protection than the city police. They were exhaustively trained to protect the life of their clients. Of course, they would insist on changing all the routines of their client and utilize risk profiling to make it that much more difficult for threats to materialize. The only thing she had to do was to pay through the nose. Miss Israel made that suggestion because herself was under a special security for the high probability of being assassinated by Palestinian Muslim terrorists. Rani welcomed the proposal and said she was prepared to pay any amount of money in order to ensure the safety of her daughter. The representative checked the phone book and found a number of private security companies. After conducting phone interviews and asking for their procedures and policies, Rani decided upon 4 very experienced and highly trained bodyguards for her daughter. Paying top dollar, she requested armed guards, primed with all the latest equipment. Each guard was going to cost her thousands of euros a day, but Rani felt a little more secure knowing that the 4 bodyguards would always be with her daughter, always. With their arrival, the professionals made many changes, one of which they wholeheartedly agreed to was outsourcing all of Miss India's food. Rani was already a step ahead of her guards, driven by a very healthy distrust of the hotel staff. She simply would not allow her daughter to eat any food offered by hotel staff. It was free of charge, but she told the hotel restaurant not to send any food or drink to Miss India's room. She said that she would provide cooked meals for her daughter. From that day on, Rani would be escorted out so that she could buy food from restaurants, never using the same restaurant more than once. She did not want to give any of the Muslims a chance to breach the protocol that her security teams had so painstakingly put in place for their own protection. Rani did not need to tell them that all casual and uncleared visitors would not be allowed to enter their hotel room. Even the housekeeping crew was not exempted from this rule. Soon, Rani and Aphrodite were changing their own bed sheets, straightening their own rooms and scrubbing their own bathrooms. The protests of the British Muslims naturally drew the attention of the media. Journalists swarmed the lobby of the hotel where all the potential Miss Worlds were accommodated. Every one of them tried to talk to Miss India. Rani Krishna and her security team did not allow them access. Denied the opportunity to interview Miss India or her entourage, the media switched their focus to the easily accessible Muslim protesters who were more than willing to make statements and voice their discontent. Those interviewed took advantage of an unchallenged platform and constructed their grievances based on half-truths, concentrating on the incendiary statements of the pretty and docile Miss India maintaining she was a vehement bigot, and it was witnessed on national television that she called their gracious Prophet Muhammad her foot and she spit on the Holy Quran. Taken out of context, with no rebuttal from Miss India, the media construed her silence as an admission of guilt and implied consent to report the facts as presented. The resultant media campaign played right into the hands of the Muslims. London media had not bothered to research her history, so it came to pass that the British media blamed the victim rather than the culprit, the kidnapped rather than the kidnapper, the abused rather than the abuser, and the raped rather than the rapist. A question in the headlines grew momentum and eventually the public began to demand that Miss India be ejected from the competition. The general consensus was that it was highly unseemly for the crowned representative of a multiracial and multi-religious country to ridicule Islam and hurt the religious sentiments of more than 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. Numerous calls and letters demanded her disqualification on the grounds that the eventual winner of the Miss World title would carry her title on an international platform. Her duties would include traveling during her reign and advocating peace, equality for women, leveraging help for the poor and fighting against the oppression of women and abuse of children. How would such a maligned woman perform those duties? In an emergency meeting, the judges of the Miss World pageant rejected the notion because they did not have proof to justify her expulsion. Both the organizing and the judging committees collectively agreed that Miss India should be queried during the interview segment. Their list of questions fringed around the questions they all wanted to ask of her. Why did you call the Prophet Muhammad my foot? Why did you spit on the Holy Quran? Desperate to avoid a scandal, they conspired to have her state on camera, and to the entire world, exactly what she had said. If things went their way, she would incriminate herself and leave the organizing committee no option but to disqualify her. Problem solved. Once disqualified, she would be barred from ever again participating in any international beauty pageants, including Miss World, Miss Universe, Miss Earth, and Miss International. The organizing committee and the judges prepared what is known in symbolic logic, a series of leading questions for Miss India. A leading question always implicates the person answering the question. For example, if someone would ask you, "Have you stopped cheating on your taxes?" The only way to emerge unscathed from this form of questioning is not to answer. Not answering a question was not an option for any of the Miss Worlds. It was not an option for any Miss World to remain silent on stage. Along the same line of thought, once again the questions prepared for Miss India were, why did you call the Prophet of Islam my foot, and why did you say I will spit on the holy book of Muslims? The judges knew that there would be no possible justification that Miss India could give to justify her actions, and no one would oppose the committee and the judges when they announced her disqualification. The competition started with 99 contestants from 99 countries. In the first round, the contestants were judged on the beauty of face and figure. This round eliminated 84 contestants. The remaining 15 progressed to the next round, where they were judged in swimsuits. From that round, 10 of the best candidates would be selected to proceed to the evening gown competition. The semi-finalists would be pared down to 5 finalists. The 5 finalists would be required to answer a question put to them by the judges. Their answers would determine the next year's Miss World. To avoid lengthy details and descriptions, we will proceed directly to the final day. The 5 finalists were Miss Venezuela, Miss USA, Miss Lebanon, Miss Israel, and Miss India. All 5 finalists were extremely ravishing. The judges had their work cut out for them, as it was impossible to pick out a winner just looking at them. Visually, any one of the girls would have fit the bill. Tasked to pick only one, the next stage was more to extend the notion of beauty in character, knowledge, and intellect, and people skills set. It looked like the candidate with the least flaws in the question and answer section would step up to the throne. The 5 finalists had to blindly pick a judge, and that judge would ask them a question. They were given envelopes with names of corresponding judges in them. The nature and type of question was entirely the judge's prerogative. With the exception of Miss India, whose question had already been prepared beforehand. The committee had already taken it upon themselves that if Miss India ever made it to this level, they would eject her from the competition. Based on their predetermined question, each and every one of them knew and understood that Miss India's chance to be Miss World was 0%. The first 4 finalists were asked very simple and straightforward questions. One of them fielded a question around the preferred qualities of a life partner. Yet another was asked what would she do if she were crowned Miss World. When all the other contestants had answered their questions, the crowd focused its attention on the scandal-ridden Miss India. The judge she had picked from the ballot box was an American judge. For the last 3 months, Ronnie had appointed a highly qualified coach skilled in the coaching of beauty queen candidates. With specific focus on interview questions, the trio had covered hundreds of questions and possible scenarios. No one expected the question presented, and before Miss India had begun to answer it, the hushed murmurs indicated that the crowd had already written her off. The judge started her question with a short prelude: the incident at Heathrow, where thousands of British Muslim protesters pelted you with tomatoes and rotten eggs, has raised many unanswered questions. The panel would like to ask you a direct question. Before asking my question, I would like to remind you and the audience of a situation in Nigeria when the Miss World Beauty Pageant 2002 had its venue moved to London because a Nigerian female journalist said that were he alive, the Prophet Muhammad would choose a wife from among the contestants. This statement angered the Muslims of Nigeria and led to riots and violence across that trouble-torn country, resulting in deaths of over 100 civilians. From what we have learned from that bitter experience and your situation, why then, did you insult the religious sentiments of 1.5 billion Muslims all over the world by calling their holy prophet Muhammad, my foot, and spitting on the Holy Quran? Miss India did her coach proud that day, fielding the question with poise. After a moment recollecting, she answered, "To answer your question, I must relate my personal experience. The situation has been taken out of context. First of all, I deny ever having said that the Prophet of Islam is my foot, nor have I ever spit on the Holy Quran. In Homeland, after being crowned Miss India in the city of Bangalore, I was asked an impromptu question by a female journalist. She asked me what I would call a man who married and slept with a 9-year-old girl. In retrospect, I should have asked her to clarify her question. I assumed she was asking me a hypothetical question about a specific type of man. At no time did she indicate that the question she asked was in reference to the Prophet Muhammad. My personal experiences as a child had exposed me to sexual abuse, and the question was a very emotional one for me to answer. Please allow me to express these things. As a child of 7, I was forced into marrying a 70-year-old Saudi man by the name of Sheikh Faiz bin Ahmed. For the next 3 years, he imprisoned me in a house in Asmara and molested me continually for 1 year, and at the age of 9, he began to rape me. At the age of 11, I became pregnant with his child. It was during that time that the Eritrean police freed me from his house and sent me back to Saudi Arabia. Upon my return to Jeddah, a group of white people took my case up in the Sharia court and tried to have my marriage to the old man annulled. The Jeddah Sharia court rejected the appeal lodged by them and ruled in favor of the old man, forcing me to go back to him. This time, he took me to Iran, where I was imprisoned as a child bride for the next 7 years, suffering rape almost every day. Wait a minute, shouted the American woman who asked Miss India the tricky question, do you have another name besides Aphrodite Khan? Yes, I do have another name, but I had changed it officially because my birth name reminded me of my childhood. Was it something like Ifatan Khan or Irfan Khan? It was Ifat Khan. Now I know who are you and whom you are talking about. I was one of the white people you mentioned earlier. A task force of 7 American CIA agents was sent to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to investigate a murder of a young American woman whose father-in-law was a senator. I am now retired and the case has already been declassified. It was by mere chance that during our investigations in Jeddah we stumbled across your case. Needless to say, we took your case up to the highest authorities in Saudi Arabia, but as you mentioned, our appeal was dismissed. The Jeddah Sharia court upheld your husband's marriage to a child without the consent of the child as lawful in Islam. We were also told, as a matter of fact, that this practice is justified based on the marriage between Prophet Muhammad and his child bride, Aisha. After exhausting all legal avenues, we had to come to terms with the fact that we could not save you from your husband. Our only consolation was the fact that after the Saudi flew you to Iran, we succeeded in saving your mother. She was sentenced to die from stoning, falsely accused of being a prostitute and marrying 2 husbands at the same time. Did you say you managed to save my mother from being stoned to death? Yes, we did. Miss India began to weep and say, for 12 years, I told myself that my mother was a bad person who was executed for her crimes. That wasn't true. Your mother was an innocent woman who was falsely accused and unjustly condemned by a group of fanatical Islamic clerics. She was impregnated through a gang rape by 2 Saudi policemen. Where is my mother now? After she was acquitted, she returned to India. I remember that our team had received instructions to extend humanitarian assistance to her as a refugee, but she insisted on going back to her children in Mumbai. I am so thankful to you and your group for saving my mother from the hands of those ruthless people. In my experience, many of these Arab men treat women as of no value and with disrespect, and consider their needs unworthy of consideration. It is in this frame of reference that I had answered the question posed to me by the journalist in my country of India. My answer to the question remains the same. I would still curse any pedophile who takes advantage of a defenseless child. Ms. India with a sullen and heavy heart continued, the journalist also asked me to comment on a scenario. She explained that if a man uses the defense that child marriages are authorized and approved by the Prophet Muhammad, what would my response be? I simply repeated my previous answer, stating that I would likewise curse any man who married and slept with a 9-year-old child. The journalist was not happy with my answer, so she advised me that there is a verse in the Quran, which sanctions the marriage of an adult man to a young girl before puberty. I immediately told her that if there is such a verse in the Holy Quran, I will spit on that verse. I was speaking figuratively, and at no time did I spit on the book or on camera. I will have to conclude by saying that I am not sure if the Prophet of Islam slept with a 9-year-old girl or not. But I am saying before the August Judging Committee, the respected audience, and the entire world, that if the Prophet Muhammad had truly married and slept with a 9-year-old girl, he is under my foot, and if there is a verse in the Quran that allows a man to marry and sleep with an underage girl, I will spit on that verse. Quran 65:4. Even if I don't win Miss World, and even if I go from here directly to jail, I am not going to withdraw my words, and I am not going to apologize to Muslims who think otherwise. If Muslims want me to retract my statement and apologize, first let them condemn the teachings of the Sharia law that legalizes the molestation and rape of young girls under the pretense of marriage. Let them condemn their prophet for marrying a 9-year-old girl and giving his followers license to do the same. If they are offended by my words, let them tear out the offending pages from their holy books of hadiths and erase the verse of their Quran that sanctions institutionalized pedophilia and rape. Let them condemn the Jeddah Sharia court for acknowledging that I was married without my express consent and citing no need for my agreement to the contract of marriage. Let them condemn the man who raped me and impregnated me when I was 11. If they are offended by my words, I am also offended by a system that robbed me of my childhood to satisfy the desires of an old man and to suffer seeing things a young child should never see, to experience brutality and physical abuse many times to the point of death, to almost die from childbirth because I was not taken to a hospital. I am not the only victim of these atrocities. My husband, emulating his prophet, was arrested at the Mumbai International Airport for marrying and raping an 11-year-old girl from Hyderabad. He was 80 years old at the time and was killed by a fellow prisoner when he had bribed all parties involved and it appeared he would walk free. Ladies and gentlemen, now that you have heard the tale of my childhood, and what Allah-fearing men have done to me, and after long being deprived of my free will and the right to choose, I now choose to stand by my earlier statement without fear or favor. To the memory of countless child brides that have suffered and died, to the honor of the brave prisoner and vigilante who gave his life to uphold justice, to those who saw fit not to acknowledge me as a person when I was a sex object, but now see me as their foe, I now dedicate my life to speak for those who cannot. To those who pelted me and my blameless mother at Heathrow Airport, I now challenge them to throw their rotten eggs at their prophet and smash their tomatoes on their Qurans, if they have so much as a conscience. And that, honored judges, ladies and gentlemen, must remain my answer to you and anyone else who might ask the same of me. Thank you. When Aphrodite Khan finished her response to what was now the longest answer ever given to a beauty pageant question, dead silence rested on the hearts of the judges and the 4,000 spectators like a heavy blanket. No one seemed willing to be the first one to acknowledge or challenge her resolve. The master of ceremony was stunned into inaction. The silence was broken when suddenly, the sound of a single person clapping pierced the silence of the hall. It was none other than the American judge who put Aphrodite Khan on the spot. A trickle of applause followed, and in a short time, the entire auditorium clapped as one. By this time, the American judge was already on her feet, as the first to honor her with a standing ovation. The audience, just now coming to terms with the enormity and scale of her answer, rose to their feet too. They may have continued clapping if they had not seen the judge walk towards Miss India and hug her, both tearing with emotion. That night, Aphrodite Khan's innocent dream became a reality, and the world now had a new Miss World.